In today's video, we'll be looking at stories of people eaten alive by sharks. From a peaceful snorkeling trip gone wrong in the Red Sea, to a late-night swim in Hawaii that ended a honeymoon in tragedy. But first, on the shores of Reunion Island, a surfer's routine session would become his final moments alive. It was March 23, 2013. At Troy Basins on Reunion Island, the water looked calm to the small group of surfers who went out that afternoon. The waves came in at a steady pace, not too strong, and the breeze carried the smell of salt across the beach. For one man, a normal surf session was about to turn into something tragic. David Rousseau was 28 years old, a local electrician from St. Paul. He was known as a reliable worker, the kind of person neighbors trusted to fix wiring or restore power after storms. Away from work, his main outlet was surfing. He had learned to ride waves as a boy, and though he never treated it as a sport to win or show off, it became part of his weekend rhythm. His approach to life was careful, not reckless, and even in the water, he wasn't known to push limits. That Saturday, he told friends he wanted only a short session, just a couple of waves before going home. It seemed like a safe plan close to shore, in familiar waters, with 3 friends alongside him. Troy Basins was a stretch of coast with jagged volcanic rocks along its edge and waves that broke clean when conditions were right. That afternoon, the beach was unusually quiet. Thin clouds passed overhead, dimming the sun at times, while the water shifted between shades of blue and green. On the rocks, fishermen cast their lines, the wind carrying the steady sound of waves hitting stone. Past the break, the reef dropped off quickly, leaving deep water close to where the surfers waited. That same depth made the area attractive to more than just surfers. Bull sharks often patrolled these waters, moving in from deeper channels to hunt close to shore. Growing over 10 feet long and built for raw power, they were among the few shark species comfortable in shallow surf zones and even river mouths. Their strong jaws could crush bone in a single bite, and their presence around Reunion had already led to a series of fatal incidents. Authorities responded with bans and warning signs. But by 2013, Troy Basins was still a place where the risks were known. That day, the warnings were visible and verbal. Surfers noticed the beach was emptier than usual. Fishermen waved from the rocks, signaling for them to leave the water. A handful of locals had avoided entering altogether. But for David and his friends, the sight of steady waves and no obvious fins convinced them it was worth staying. The group stuck close together, no more than 50 yards from shore. For half an hour, they shared the water without issue. They traded small waves and sat on their boards in the lulls, talking and waiting for the next set. The calm almost made them forget the signals from shore. David caught one wave, rode it smoothly, and began paddling back toward his friends. That was when the surface shifted behind them in a violent burst. A bull shark came up fast and slammed into the bottom of David's board. The hit knocked him straight into the water. His friends froze, sitting stiff on their boards as the surface thrashed with bubbles and foam. David came up once and let out a short cry before the shark grabbed his leg. In seconds, the water turned red, spreading out in a wide cloud around them. The shark let go for a moment, circling with its fin cutting the surface. In the rush of panic, David's friends tried to paddle toward him but stopped when the fin swept close by. The shark struck again, this time grabbing his torso. It twisted and rolled, dragging him beneath the surface. From the rocks, fishermen waved their arms and shouted, but there was nothing they could do. The attack lasted less than a minute, yet for those watching, it felt drawn out. The water churned with foam and bubbles before going still again. For a moment, David's arm broke the surface, then disappeared. His board floated back up, scarred with deep tooth marks on one side. A cloud of blood spread wider, carried by the current toward the reef. His friends, too afraid to move, stared at the place where he had vanished. Rescue calls were made immediately. Within minutes, lifeguards on jet skis arrived and began scanning the water. The fishermen pointed to where the red stain had been, but by then the current had moved it farther out. team searched for hours, circling the coastline with boats. They recovered David's board, but no body. The ocean had claimed what was left. The community response was quiet but heavy. A funeral was held days later in St. Paul. More than 200 people came. Family, friends, co-workers, and neighbors. The service was modest, with no reporters inside, though the story made its way in the local papers. His friends who had been in the water sat together, still in shock. For them, the memory of what they had seen was enough to silence any words. Authorities responded by reinforcing the restrictions already in place. Additional shark nets were installed, and patrols increased at known surfing spots. Officials reminded the public that the bans existed for a reason, even if they were often ignored. For the people of Reunion, it was another reminder that the island's waters, though beautiful and familiar, carried risks that no one could fully control. After a surfer was dragged under off Reunion, a year later in Egypt's Red Sea, a snorkeler would meet an oceanic whitetip in waters that also looked calm at first. It was June 14, 2014. At Ras Mohammed National Park, on the southern tip of Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, the water looked calm and harmless. Sunlight struck the surface and lit up the reef below. Tourists leaned over the boat, pointing at the shades of blue stretching into the distance. For most of them, it was just another holiday outing. But among the group was a man seeing the Red Sea for the first time. His name was Lucas Stein, 34, a mechanic from Hamburg, Germany. He spent his days repairing trucks and heavy equipment. Time off was rare, and this was the first trip abroad he and his wife had managed in years. Lucas had always been fascinated by the ocean. He read about coral reefs, watched documentaries, and dreamed of seeing them in person. Diving seemed too demanding, but snorkeling offered him a way to experience the sea without the weight of tanks or training. At home, he was known as practical, steady, and cautious. He avoided nightlife, preferred quiet evenings, and rarely sought thrills. The Red Sea was supposed to give him peace more than excitement. His plan was simple: spend time in the water, swim above the reefs, and take photos to remember it. When their hotel offered a guided snorkeling tour, Lucas signed up quickly. He told his wife it was safe. There were guides, other tourists, and calm weather. Nothing about it seemed dangerous. That morning, conditions were perfect. The sun was bright but not harsh, and the sea carried only a breeze. The reef stretched below the surface, a wide patchwork of coral and fish. Silver baitfish darted together in schools, breaking apart when larger shadows moved near. The water was unusually clear, giving the group long views of the reef beneath them. To those watching from the boat, it looked like a safe place to swim. But beneath the surface, larger predators were never far. Oceanic whitetip sharks were known in these waters. They can grow more than 10 feet long and were built for strength and endurance. Unlike many sharks that kept their distance, whitetips often approach divers and boats without fear. They swim slowly but deliberately, with wide fins and a steady circling pattern. Their bite is powerful enough to crush bone, and they have a reputation for persistence once drawn in. In the Red Sea, a handful of incidents had already involved them, but guides usually downplayed the risk to tourists. There had been warnings that week. Local fishermen spoke of sharks seen closer to shore. Some divers reported more encounters than usual, but guides reassured visitors that attacks were rare. They told the group to stay together and follow instructions. Lucas, his wife, and 4 other tourists entered the water with masks and fins. The guide led them out, pointing at coral formations and small fish. At first, everything went as planned. The group floated above the reef, drifting with the current. Bright fish passed below them, and sunlight cut across the water. Lucas, always curious, drifted a little farther from the group. He became absorbed in a school of parrotfish, their bright colors flashing as they nibbled at coral. His wife kept him in sight, but noticed he He was edging away. Beneath him, a darker shape moved. An oceanic whitetip rose from deeper water, circling slowly at first. It passed beneath the group, its long fins standing out in the clear water. Lucas was just outside the circle of swimmers when the shark turned. It rushed upward and clamped onto his arm and side in a single bite. The impact spun him, and his snorkel mask slipped free, floating to the surface. He let out a muffled cry as bubbles rushed from his mouthpiece. Blood spread quickly in the water. The shark released him briefly, then circled back. Guides shouted and splashed, waving fins and striking the water with sticks they carried to deter predators. The rest of the tourists were pulled back toward the boat in panic. Lucas tried to stay afloat, but the shark returned, biting again across his torso. Witnesses later described seeing the roll of its body as it thrashed, pulling him down. The water turned red in wide clouds that spread through the current. His wife and others on the surface saw his arm rise once, then vanish beneath the foam. The shark circled once more, then disappeared with Lucas below. His mask and a trail of bubbles were all that remained at the surface. Guides pulled the survivors onto the boat, their faces pale, their eyes fixed on the empty water. Rescue calls were made as the boat sped back to shore. Divers returned the next day to search the reef, scanning the drop-offs and channels. They recovered fragments of Lucas's gear, a fin and the broken strap of his mask, but no body. With currents moving swiftly and predators active in the area, the search ended quickly. Back in Germany, his wife returned home alone, still shaken. The story was reported briefly in German papers as a tourist accident abroad, but it drew little attention outside of local coverage. In Egypt, officials suspended snorkeling tours at that reef for several weeks, citing safety concerns, before quietly reopening when demand returned. To the guides and tourists who had been there, the memory of the red water and the helplessness of watching it unfold stayed long after the search ended. Months after a snorkeler went missing in Egypt's Red Sea, a fisherman in the Florida Keys was pulled from his boat. A tiger shark had taken hold, and his friends could only watch as the water turned violent. It was July 22, 2017. Off Isla Morada in the Florida Keys, the water was calm and bright under a hot sun. The sea spread wide and flat with only a faint ripple from the morning breeze. A small skiff drifted near a reef line. 3 men aboard and 1 already in the water. For them, it was another weekend spearfishing trip, something they had done many times before. But that morning would not end in the way any of them expected. Tony Ramirez was 29 years old, a dive shop worker from Key Largo. He spent his days setting up gear for tourists, guiding beginners on shallow dives, and keeping equipment in order. Around town, he was known as confident in the water, someone who moved easily in the ocean. On weekends, he joined his cousins to hunt fish. They grilled what they caught at family barbecues, a tradition that brought everyone together. For Tony, fishing was more than food. It was a way to stay connected to the water he grew up around. He had been diving since he was a teenager and was comfortable holding his breath at moderate depths. He wasn't reckless, but he, like many locals, grew used to seeing sharks without trouble. He believed that as long as he stayed alert, there was little real risk. Sharks circled often in the Keys, but most encounters ended with the predator moving on. That quiet confidence shaped his choices, even when the signs around him suggested more caution. That morning, the setting was ideal. Below the surface, the reef stretched in pastures of coral and seagrass, darting fish flashing silver in the light. The water was so clear that shadows from larger fish could be seen moving over the bottom. On the boat, his cousins kept watch, the skiff rocking gently on the current. The sound of gulls carried overhead, and for a while it seemed like any other peaceful day on the water. But the Florida Keys were also home to tiger sharks. These predators often appeared around fishing and diving spots, drawn by the scent of blood or the sound of struggling prey. Tiger sharks can reach more than 12 feet in length and weigh close to 1,000 pounds. With broad heads, striped bodies, and serrated teeth, they were built for power. Unlike some species that stay at a distance, tiger sharks are bold and opportunistic. They home in on bleeding fish, and divers carrying their catch were at greater risk. That week, other spearfishers had mentioned losing fish to sharks. Locals said there seemed to be more sightings near reefs, though no serious incidents were reported. The warnings were easy to ignore. For Tony and his cousins, sharks were just part of the environment. They believed that as long as no one panicked, they would be safe. Tony dove down about 25 feet, spear gun in hand. He waited, scanning the reef until he spotted a grouper moving along the rocks. He lined up the shot, released the shaft, and struck. The fish jerked violently, blood seeping into the water. He clipped the catch to his belt line, a common practice, and kicked toward the surface. The trail of blood spread behind him as he rose, carried by the current. From the boat, his cousin spotted a large fin cutting through the water toward him. They shouted, but the shark was already closing in. A tiger shark rushed in from the side, drawn by the bleeding fish. Its jaws snapped at the grouper, but it caught more than that. Its teeth tore into Tony's thigh as it hit, spinning him and knocking the fish loose. Tony tried to kick free, bubbles streaming up as he thrashed. His cousins threw a rope, one of them reaching with a pole, but the shark circled back quickly. It struck again, clamping onto his leg and rolling in the water. Blood spread in a wide cloud, carried fast by the current. His cousins watched as his arm broke the surface once before he vanished under the foam. Then the water calmed. The fin disappeared as the red cloud drifted across the reef. The only things left floating were his spear gun, the shaft bent and marked with deep tooth impressions, and the belt clip where the fish had been. They radioed for help and boats in the area responded. Within an hour, the Coast Guard joined the search. Divers swept the reef, moving through channels in a long drop-off. They recovered the broken spear gun and a torn strap from one of his fins, but no body. The search continued for several days before officials called it off. Back in Key Largo, the news spread quickly. His family waited at home for updates, hoping for some closure. None came. Days later, a memorial service was held, attended by family, friends, and co-workers from the dive shop. They shared stories of his calm manner in the water, of the weekends he spent bringing home fish for everyone to share. The service was simple but heavy. The loss felt across the small community. Authorities reminded divers afterward about the dangers of spearfishing in shark-heavy waters. They repeated warnings about carrying fish attached to belts, about blood drawing predators in minutes, and about the speed in which tiger sharks responded. It was not new advice, but the incident gave it new weight. While a fisherman in Florida was pulled from his own boat by a tiger shark, and the struggle ended before his friends could save him, halfway across the world, a teenage swimmer waded into the surf with her classmates, unaware of what moved below. In Australia, a great white rose from the shallows and dragged her under. It was February 27, 2016. At Lighthouse Beach near Ballina in New South Wales, the air was heavy with late summer heat. The water stretched calm and flat at first glance, sunlight flashing across the surface. Families walked along the sand, children carried buckets, and a few older swimmers waded knee-deep in the surf. It looked peaceful, but the warnings that day told another story. Earlier reports had noted a large shadow offshore, and lifeguards had urged caution. Sophie Turner was 17 years old, a high school student from Ballina. She grew up near the coast, often helping with their school's beach cleanup programs. Teachers described her as quiet but dependable, someone who gave her time without complaint. Swimming was one of her hobbies, though she had never been part of the surfing crowd. To her, the water was a place to relax, not to compete. That afternoon, she joined 3 classmates for a swim. They had finished an early weekend project and decided to cool off at Lighthouse Beach. It wasn't far from home, familiar to them all. Sophie's parents had allowed the trip, knowing she stayed close to shore and surrounded by friends. She was there to enjoy the water, chat with her friends, and make the most of the long summer day. Though lifeguards had flagged earlier concerns, the sight of others waiting at the edge gave the group reassurance. The setting looked harmless on the surface. The beach stretched wide, backed by low dunes and grassy patches. The water was waist deep where Sophie entered, pale green with sand shifting beneath each wave. From shore, everything looked normal, yet further out, the color of the water darkened. The currents were known to draw fish in, and the quiet gaps between waves gave the sense of something unseen moving just below. Great white sharks often patrolled this coast. They can grow over 20 feet long and weigh more than a ton. They hunt seals and fish, but are known to pass close to beaches, following schools of mullet or tuna. With powerful jaws, serrated teeth, and bursts of speed that can exceed 20 miles per hour, they're among the most capable predators in the sea. Attacks on humans are rare, but when they happen in shallow surf, the results are often severe. That week, several shark sightings have been logged along the north coast. At Lighthouse Beach itself, lifeguards had cleared surfers earlier in the day after spotting movement beyond the breakers. Locals said sharks had been lingering around baitfish schools. Signs were posted, but many beachgoers ignored them once the patrol boats left. To some, the warnings felt routine. Sophie and her friends noticed others in the shallows and decided that staying waist deep seemed safe enough. For a while, the group stayed near the shallows, splashing each other and enjoying the warm water. Sophie drifted a little farther out, letting the small waves lift and drop her shoulders. She brushed her hair back, glancing at her friends on the sand. The beach felt calm until a sudden splash broke the surface beside her. A great white lunged from below, clamping onto her thigh. The hit pulled her sideways and dropped her under. The sand stirred up as she kicked upward, but the shark shook her, and the water quickly turned red. Her friends shouted and tried to move closer, but fear held them back. The shark circled once and came again, locking onto her hip. This time it dragged her into deeper water, pulling her away from the waist-high spot where the others froze, too stunned to follow. 2 bodyboarders close by tried to help, slapping the water and kicking toward her to drive the shark away. They reached the spot just as her arms surfaced, then slipped back under the spreading red water. The shark's fin cut through the shallows one last time before turning toward deeper water. On shore, the shouting stopped, and the beach grew quiet except for the steady sound of waves pushing the blood closer to land. Lifeguards on jet skis arrived within minutes, alerted by shouts and frantic gestures from beachgoers. They circled the site, scanning the water. For several tense minutes, they searched, but Sophie was gone. Her friends stood on the sand crying, wrapped in towels by bystanders. Rescue boats and helicopters joined, sweeping the shoreline and beyond the headland as dusk approached. After hours of searching, divers recovered partial remains caught in a current near the reef line. Her swim gear was torn, straps frayed and marked by teeth. Authorities ended the search later that night, confirming the tragedy. At her school, word spread quickly. The next evening, a vigil was held in the gymnasium. Dozens of classmates and teachers gathered in silence, leaving flowers and photographs at the front. The room carried the weight of shock more than words. For a town used to living with the sea, the loss hit deeply, especially among the younger students who had joined Sophie in community projects. Authorities responded by increasing patrols along Balena's beaches. New drone surveillance programs were launched, and more warning systems were put in place during the summer months. Experts reminded residents that shark presence along the north coast was seasonal and tied to natural feeding patterns. They urged people to take the warnings seriously. A teenager in Australia was dragged under in broad daylight, her cries lost beneath the surf before help could reach her. 2 years later, on the other side of the Pacific, a newlywed slipped into the water under moonlight, unaware of what circled close to shore. In Hawaii, the jaws of a tiger shark would decide his fate before the night was over. It was June 18, 2018. The night at Ka'anapali Beach on the island of Maui looked calm, the water smooth and silver under the moonlight. Tourists wandered the sand in small groups, voices carrying faintly across the shore. The air was warm and heavy, the kind of night that seems safe and inviting. But in the darkness beyond the reef, the sea held more than just waves. Daniel Carter was 29, a high school history teacher from Ohio. At home, he was steady and dependable, the kind of person both colleagues and students trusted. He lived a quiet life, filling his days with lessons, grading, and small projects around the house. Vacations were rare. He and his wife Emma had saved for years to afford this trip, their first journey outside the mainland. They had married only weeks earlier, celebrating with family before flying to Hawaii for their honeymoon. Daniel wasn't careless. Friends described him as practical, sometimes overly cautious. But that night he wanted to do something simple, something memorable to mark the trip. After dinner, as couples strolled along the beach, he suggested a swim under the moonlight. To him, it was harmless, a chance to enjoy the ocean away from the heat of the day. Emma hesitated, remembering the resort staff's reminder that night swimming wasn't advised, but Daniel promised they'd stay close to shore. The beach seemed peaceful. The tide rolled in gently, washing over footprints in the sand. Bars and hotels behind them played music, their light stretching faintly across the water. A few people walked along the shoreline, some carrying towels, others just enjoying the view. Daniel and Emma slipped off their sandals and waded in. The water was cool against their skin, a relief after the humid evening. Emma stopped at waist depth, while Daniel went a little farther, floating on his back for a moment and looking up at the stars. Beneath the surface, the conditions were different. Tiger sharks are common in Hawaiian waters, often growing 12 to 16 feet long and weighing more than 1,000 pounds. Known for eating almost anything, they're bold hunters and do not shy away from people. Unlike reef sharks, which often keep their distance, tiger sharks are curious and unpredictable. At night, their advantage grows as they move closer to shore to search for prey in the low light. For locals, this was common knowledge, but to many tourists, it was just another bit of advice that could be ignored. Earlier in the day, fishermen had been seen chumming farther down the coast. It was a routine practice, but one that sometimes drew sharks closer than usual. Staff at the resort had reminded guests to avoid the water after sunset, but warnings are easy to brush aside when the evening feels calm. Emma called out softly for Daniel not to swim too far. He waved back, reassuring her that he was fine. A couple walking on the sand noticed the disturbance offshore, a fin slicing briefly above the surface before vanishing. They assumed it was a dolphin, common in the area, and kept walking. In the water, Daniel treaded calmly, turning back toward Emma. He felt the current shift against his legs, followed by the sudden flicker of a shadow passing underneath. The strike came without warning. From below, the tiger shark surged upward, its jaws clamping onto his leg. The pull was immediate, jerking him under. Water splashed violently, breaking the stillness of the night. Emma screamed from where she stood, frozen in the shallows. Daniel thrashed, his arms flailing against the surface, but the strength of the shark was overwhelming. Blood spread quickly, visible under the moonlight. The shark released him for a moment, circling with its fin cutting the surface. Daniel tried to push himself upright, but the shark lunged again, biting into his torso and dragging him sideways. Waves turned red as he disappeared into the turbulence. Two bystanders shouted from the sand, but no one entered the water. The rolling motion of the shark shook Daniel like a rag doll, churning froth and blood in the surf. Emma stood waist deep, screaming for him, unable to move closer. His hand broke the surface once, reaching upward, then slipped back under as the shark twisted and pulled him deeper. The attack slowed as suddenly as it began. The fin surfaced once more, cutting across the shallows before vanishing into deeper water. The ocean settled again, leaving only foam and a spreading red stain carried toward shore by the tide. The silence that followed was broken only by the waves lapping the sand. Resort staff rushed to Emma and pulled her away from the water as emergency services were called. Boats and divers searched through the night, sweeping the nearby reef with lights. By morning, they recovered only Daniel's torn swim trunks and his wedding band lodged in a patch of coral. His body was never found. The story appeared in local news, noted as another reminder of how active tiger sharks have been that summer. Authorities repeated warnings about night swimming, posted new signs along Ka'anapali Beach and nearby resorts. Locals spoke quietly about how familiar these dangers were, yet how often tourists ignored them. Emma returned to Ohio with her family. The funeral was held in a small church, attended by more than 300 people. Students, teachers, neighbors, all gathered to support her. There was little to say, except that the sea had taken them. For Maui residents, the case joined a long list of tragedies tied to the ocean, proof that even calm water can hide danger. The ocean was unchanged, its waves carrying on as before. But for those who watched that night, and for Emma who returned home alone, it became a lasting reminder of how quickly beauty and danger can exist in the same place. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, you're gonna love the one waiting for you on the end screen right now. Go check it out, and I'll see you there.